The evening sky pressed low over the small, weather-beaten house, its fading light seeping through thin curtains, like a reluctant goodbye. Inside, Alora sat hunched in the armchair that had molded to her shape over decades. The floral fabric was frayed, the wooden arms polished smooth by the restless grip of her hands. She looked smaller than she had ever been, bones sharp beneath papery skin, her back curved as though the years had bent her into submission. On the coffee table sat a single object, her old phone, propped against a chipped porcelain mug. The screen glowed faintly, the recorder app open. A tiny red dot blinked in a steady rhythm, like a fragile heartbeat. She stared at it for a long time before pressing her fingers to her lips, summoning courage. Her voice, when it came, was slow and trembling, thin, like silk that had been worn and washed too many times. "Maya, Jordan." "Lena," she began, their names a soft invocation. "If you are hearing this, it means I am gone, or close enough that you might as well believe I am." She drew in a shallow breath. For a moment, her gaze drifted to the window, to the tangle of dry roses she had once planted with hope. Then, with an effort, she brought herself back to the moment. "I remember," she said, her tone carrying the faint lilt of a smile. "When you were little, and the world seemed so much smaller, so much kinder. You used to sit at the kitchen table, your legs swinging, because they couldn't reach the floor yet. I would make pancakes in the shape of stars for Maya, because she swore they tasted better than circles. Jordan, you hated syrup. You wanted your pancakes plain, with sugar sprinkled like snow. And Lena," here, her voice caught but she pushed on, "you would not eat unless the plate was the blue one with the chipped edge." For a few minutes, the recording was filled with her weaving these small, tender stories, memories pressed like flowers between the pages of her mind. She painted scenes of birthday cakes baked from scratch, of school projects finished in the soft glow of the kitchen lamp, of scraped knees kissed better without complaint. She laughed quietly at some recollections, the sound tinged with both joy and something unspoken. But beneath the warmth, her voice held an undertow, a weight that could not be hidden forever. As she spoke, her thin fingers worried at the hem of the shawl wrapped around her shoulders, pulling stray threads loose. The ticking of the old wall clock filled the pauses between her sentences, each second sounding louder in the stillness. No one had visited in months. The family photos on the mantelpiece were years out of date, their frames collecting dust. 3 lives, bright and busy, had carried on without her. She knew it. She had felt the quiet grow heavier every year, until it was the only company she had. Yet here she was, speaking to them as though they were still her children, as though she could still reach across time and touch their hearts. "I wanted you to know," she whispered at last, her voice nearly breaking, "that I loved you every moment, even when it was hard, even when you could not see me anymore." Her thumb brushed the phone screen briefly, but she did not stop the recording. She had more to say. Much more. But for now, she let her eyes close, resting in the safety of the past before venturing into the darker corridors of memory that waited ahead. The red dot kept blinking. And outside, the day finally slipped into night. The morning sunlight spilled across 3 different worlds, none of them small, none of them quiet. In a glass-walled apartment perched high above the city, Maya stood before a mirror that stretched from floor to ceiling. Her tailored blazer sat perfectly across her shoulders, a deep navy that matched the calculated calm in her eyes. The hum of her phone on the counter signaled another meeting request. She didn't even flinch. Her schedule was a carefully tuned machine, and her days were full of handshakes, deals, and applause from people who barely knew her. On the glossy sideboard behind her, framed certificates lined up like soldiers. MBA, leadership awards, recognitions for philanthropic donations. She liked the way they told a story, even if it was not the whole one. There was not a single photograph of her mother in the apartment. Maya told herself that was not intentional, but she never corrected it either. Across the city, Jordan was a different kind of spectacle. He was the man people noticed when he entered a room, not because of wealth alone, though he had that too, but because of the way he wore it. His home was all sleek lines and expensive art, the scent of imported cologne lingering in the air. He leaned back in a leather chair, a tablet in his hands, scrolling through messages from investors. On the wall behind him, a massive flat screen displayed the muted headlines of financial news. Jordan thrived in the chaos of numbers and negotiations, in the constant churn of ambition. The phone calls came in rapid succession, each one an opportunity. He answered them with an easy charm that hid the exhaustion in his eyes. Family was a word he used only in interviews, and even then, it was for the sake of image. His mother's name had not crossed his lips in years. Far from the city's steel and glass, Lena's world was bathed in sunlight and curated beauty. Her life unfolded on the glowing screens of thousands who followed her every move. She was an influencer, a lifestyle curator, the kind of woman who seemed to live inside a perpetual spring afternoon. Fresh flowers in crystal vases, silk robes that draped just so perfectly staged breakfasts she barely ate before the next shoot. She laughed easily into the camera, sharing tips on self-care and positivity, her voice smooth as honey. But behind the ring light, her smile faded quickly. The messages from her siblings were sporadic and curt, mostly about holidays or obligatory family matters. She had not heard her mother's voice in months, maybe longer, but she did not dwell on it. Dwelling did not fit her brand. In their separate worlds, the siblings were bound by one unspoken agreement. The past stayed in the past. They told themselves they had grown too different, that life had pulled them in separate directions. It was easier that way. Yet, in each of their lives, there were small, unnoticeable cracks. Maya's reflection sometimes lingered too long in the mirror, searching for something. Jordan's late nights were filled with silences that no deal could fill. Lena's laughter occasionally rang hollow, just for a second before she caught herself. Somewhere far from their polished existences, in a home they had all once shared, a red dot still blinked on a phone screen. And though none of them knew it yet, the words spoken in that dimly lit room would soon find them, slipping past locked doors and carefully built walls, reaching into the very spaces they thought were safe. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock, marking time that Elora no longer measured in years but in breaths. Her voice had been soft before, like a warm breeze stirring through a memory. Now it grew heavier, gathering an edge that could cut. "I want to tell you something," she said, her tone lowering, each word carefully chosen. "And I want you to really hear it this time, if you still know how to listen." Her breath caught, and she coughed, the sound harsh against the quiet. She steadied herself, the phone's little red light still pulsing, urging her on. "I starved so you could eat," she began, her voice shaking but steadying with each sentence. "You never saw it. You never knew the nights I went to bed with my stomach burning, because there was only enough for 3 plates, not 4. I told you I was not hungry. You believed me." Her fingers curled against the armrest of her chair, knuckles whitening as the words clawed their way out. "Do you remember winter? When the heat broke and the wind came through the windows like knives? You had coats, thick, warm, new. I wore the same thin one for 10 years. My hands turned red and cracked from the cold. But you were safe. Always safe." Her tone hardened further. "When your father died, you think the world ended for you. But you did not see what it did to me. You were too busy grieving your loss to see I was losing everything. House payments overdue, bills I could not pay, jobs that made my back ache until I could not sleep at night." She paused, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "And yet, I made sure you never went without. You grew, you thrived. I faded." The air in the room seemed to grow heavier, the ticking clock louder, as though time itself leaned in to hear. "I worked nights you never knew about. Cleaning offices for people who would not remember my name. My hands smelled of bleach for years. My shoulders ached so much I could not lift a cup without pain. But I smiled in the mornings, so you could think everything was fine." Her voice cracked then, but the tremble in it carried not weakness, but anger long kept locked away. "And when I got sick," she said quietly, almost a whisper, "I hid it. You were too busy to notice anyway. You would send your Christmas cards, your birthday texts, and I would write back pretending I was well. I thought I was protecting you, but maybe I was only protecting myself from the truth that you had already left me long before you stopped visiting." She exhaled, the sound heavy with years of unshed tears. The warmth from earlier was gone now, replaced by something colder, sharper. "I am not saying this to make you love me. I know better than that. I am saying it because the truth has been eating me alive, and soon there will be nothing left to consume." Her hand hovered over the phone, But she did not stop recording. There were darker corners of her memory still to enter, places she had never dared take anyone. Not yet. The red light blinked on, patient and merciless. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the window, like the past, knocking to be let in. Elora's voice slowed, as if she were weighing every word against the cost of speaking it. The earlier anger in her tone settled into something quieter, more dangerous. It was the sound of a wound being uncovered after years of hiding beneath bandages. "There is one night," she began, "I have never spoken of. Not to anyone, but it has lived in me like a splinter under the skin, festering, refusing to heal." Her gaze drifted toward the far corner of the room, as though she could still see the ghost of that moment lingering there. She shifted in her chair, her thin hands gripping the shawl tighter. "It was late," she continued, "long after you had all grown and gone. The house was too big for one person, but I stayed because it still smelled of you, your laundry detergent, your colognes, your perfumes. That night, I heard a car in the driveway. I thought for a moment that maybe one of you had come to visit, unannounced. My heart, it leapt." Her breath caught, and when she spoke again, her voice was lower. "But it was not a visit. It was something else, something that broke me in a way I did not know was possible." The recording crackled faintly, the sound of her shifting the phone closer. "I stood by the window. I saw the door open. I saw you, one of my own, stepping out with someone who should never have been here. Someone who looked at me with a smile in public but held nothing but contempt for me in private. I saw the way you leaned close, the way you laughed together. I watched as you walked into my home without knocking, without calling, like it was no longer mine." Her tone sharpened, slicing the air. "I stayed quiet. I did not confront you. I listened from the hallway as you spoke in low voices, saying things you thought I could not hear. Words that cut deeper than any blade. You spoke of me as if I were already gone. You said I was a burden. You said you wished I would stop calling, that I should move to a home where people like me belong." Her voice wavered, but she pressed on, and the other one, the one I trusted, agreed. They laughed. I remember the sound. It was sharp, cold. The kind of laugh you do not forget because it tells you exactly what you are worth to someone. A long silence followed. Only the sound of her breathing filled the recording. "I do not know if you remember that night," she said finally. "Maybe it was nothing to you. Maybe it was just another evening. But for me, it was the night I stopped believing that love could be unconditional. That was the night I stopped waiting for the phone to ring. That was the night I started disappearing from my own life." Her voice softened, but there was no forgiveness in it. "I will not say which one of you it was. I will not say the name of the other person. But you know who you are, and when you hear this, you will remember. You will see that night as I saw it. And maybe, for the first time, you will understand what you took from me." The red light on the phone blinked, steady and relentless, as if marking each word as evidence. Elora's breath trembled, but she did not stop. There were still darker truths ahead. This was only the first crack in the wall. The room felt colder now, though the weather outside had not changed. Elora shifted in her chair, as if her own words from earlier had drawn shadows closer. Her breathing slowed, her tone settling into something deliberate, steady, and unyielding. "There is one more truth I have hidden," she began, "one that I never meant to speak aloud. I buried it deep, not in soil, but in silence. And like all buried things, it has a way of finding its way to the surface." Her hands, thin and lined with veins, rested in her lap. She did not fidget this time. She spoke as though she had rehearsed this confession in her mind for years, without ever letting it leave her lips. "You think you know who you are," she said, her voice low but certain. "You think your blood is your blood, your name your own. But names are only words, and blood can lie." The words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. She leaned slightly toward the phone, as though trying to close the distance between herself and the ears that would eventually hear her. "Your father and I," she paused, the name almost slipping out before she swallowed it. "We had an agreement, an understanding that no one else would ever know. It was born from desperation, from love, from the kind of choices you pray you never have to make, and yet, I made it." Her breath trembled as she went on. "One of you, one of my three, is not who you believe yourself to be, Not entirely. You carry someone else's story in your veins, a story written before you even opened your eyes. And that story cost me more than I can ever explain. She stopped for a moment, the quiet stretching between her sentences like a taut string. It is not a mistake. It is not a scandal I regret. It was a decision made in the darkest hour of my life, when losing you meant losing the last piece of myself worth saving. I chose to keep you, no matter what it took, no matter what lies I had to live with. Her voice cracked slightly, but she pushed through. Your father wanted it buried. He wanted it locked away so deep that even you would never suspect. He thought the truth would break this family. Perhaps he was right. But keeping it has broken me in other ways. Elora's eyes glistened, though no tears fell. I am not telling you this to destroy you. I am telling you because when I am gone, you will dig for the truth anyway. And you will find it. Better it come from me first, even if I cannot see your faces when you hear it. She sat back, the chair creaking beneath her weight. I will not say which of you it is. I will not name the other whose blood runs in your veins. That is not my part to give away. But know this. Your life, your identity, everything you think you know, rests on a choice I made in a moment soaked in fear and love. And that choice is why we are all here today, living in the shadow of a secret buried in blood. For a long moment she said nothing. The faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only sound. Then she whispered, almost to herself, some truths are not meant to be forgiven, only understood. The red light kept blinking. Her voice was nearly spent, but the message was far from over. The next part would not be about the past. It would be about what happens when the past refuses to stay hidden. It began quietly, no announcement, no warning, just a file, passed from one device to another carrying a voice that no longer lived in the same world as its listeners. Maya was the first to receive it. The message appeared in her inbox between a flood of work emails and an invitation to a charity gala. The sender's name was unfamiliar, but the subject line stopped her. From Elora. For a long moment she simply stared at it, her hand hovering over the mouse. When she finally clicked, the audio filled her sleek office, her mother's voice curling through the air like smoke from a long-dead fire. At first Maya froze, her polished posture crumbling just slightly. She tried to keep working, but the words dragged her attention away, pulling her into memories she had locked in the attic of her mind. With every sentence, her jaw tightened, the veneer of her calm beginning to crack. Across the city, Jordan was in a boardroom, waiting for a meeting to start when his phone vibrated. The message had come to him as well, through a text from Maya, "You need to hear this." He slid in his earbuds, meaning to listen only for a moment. But as Elora's voice spilled into his ears, the numbers on his spreadsheets faded from view. His expression shifted. First confusion, then irritation, and finally something unreadable. His colleagues spoke around him, their voices distant, as though they were behind glass. Lena heard at last. She was in the middle of filming a sponsored skincare video when the notification chimed. The moment she saw the name, her bright influencer smile faltered. She excused herself from the camera, stepping into the quiet of her sunlit balcony. The moment she pressed play, the familiar tremor of Elora's voice gripped her chest like a hand that would not let go. Her eyes darted between the garden below and the phone in her palm, as though she needed to anchor herself to something living while the recording worked its way inside her. In each of their worlds, the sound was the same, steady, deliberate, unwavering. Elora's words spilled their shared history into the open, no longer bound to the dusty corners of memory. She spoke of her love, her pain, her sacrifices, the betrayal she could not forget, and the secret buried in blood. Each sibling reacted differently. Maya sat still, her fingers laced tightly in her lap. She listened until the end, not allowing herself to pause or rewind. When the silence came, she stared at the wall for a long time before picking up her phone. Jordan removed his earbuds halfway through, pacing the corridor outside the boardroom. He told himself he would finish it later, but the truth was that every word made him feel cornered, exposed. Lena clutched the phone so tightly her knuckles whitened. She replayed sections over and over, searching for something, an inflection, a word, that would make it less unbearable. It did not take long for the calls to begin. Maya to Jordan, Jordan to Lena, Lena to Maya. But the voices that answered were not soft, nor were they united in grief. The first minutes were filled with questions, rapid, sharp, overlapping. Then the questions turned into accusations. Who was she talking about? What did she mean? Why would she say that? They interrupted each other, voices rising, every sibling fighting to keep their own name out of the shadow her words had cast. By the end of that night, none of them had answers. But all three felt the same thing pressing against their ribs. A cold, restless weight that would not leave them alone. In Alora's home, the phone sat silent on the table. The little red light was no longer blinking. The message had been sent. The ripples had only just begun. The calls had ended hours ago, but the silence that followed was no less brutal. For the first time in years, Maya, Jordan, and Lena all carried the same weight in their chests, only instead of pulling them together, it pushed them further apart. Maya sat at her kitchen counter, a glass of wine untouched beside her. She replayed the final minutes of the recording in her mind, her mother's voice etched into every thought. "One of you is not who you believe yourself to be." The sentence had sunk into her like a stone into deep water. She told herself she had nothing to hide, that her life was built on truth and hard work. But the fact that she even needed to remind herself unsettled her. Her gaze drifted to the single framed photo of the three of them as children. Smiling, arms slung around each other. It was the only one she kept, and now she could not stand to look at it. Across the city, Jordan poured himself another drink, his third since leaving the office. He had shut himself in his study, the blinds drawn tight. The memory of that night, the one Alora had hinted at in the earlier part of her message, scratched at the back of his mind like something alive. He had told himself for years it was nothing, that it had meant nothing, but her voice, trembling yet certain, made it feel as though the entire world had been watching him that night. He gritted his teeth, refusing to believe she had understood what she thought she had. Still, doubt seeped in. Lena's world was no quieter. She had canceled her scheduled content shoots, claiming she was unwell. In truth, she could not bear to plaster a smile on her face, not while Alora's words rang in her ears. Every carefully cultivated image, every perfect caption suddenly felt hollow. She wandered through her apartment barefoot, replaying her own memories with her mother. Moments she had dismissed as unimportant now gnawed at her like guilt she could not explain. The next evening, Maya called them both. "We need to talk," she said, her voice clipped, more command than invitation. They met at a quiet, upscale cafe, neutral ground, though even the soft lighting and hushed music could not soften what was coming. From the moment they sat down, the air between them was sharp. The initial small talk lasted barely a minute before the accusations began. Maya leaned forward, her tone calm but her eyes sharp. "Who do you think she was talking about?" Jordan scoffed, swirling the drink in his hand. "I think she was trying to stir trouble. That's what happens when someone sits alone too long. They start rewriting history." Lena flinched. "You don't know that. Maybe she was telling the truth." The words landed like a slap. Maya turned to her sister. "And you think it's me, is that it?" "I didn't say that," Lena replied quickly, but her eyes darted away. Jordan slammed his glass down, the sound startling the quiet cafe. "It's not me, I know that much. And if either of you think otherwise, say it now." They stared at each other across the table. Three grown adults suddenly feeling like children again, cornered, defensive, desperate to protect themselves. The years of polite distance between them were crumbling, revealing something far uglier beneath, the grudges that had never truly faded. The conversation ended without resolution, but not without damage. Each sibling left convinced the others were hiding something. That night, all three lay awake in separate beds, staring at ceilings in the dark. And though none would admit it, they each found themselves thinking the same thought. If she was telling the truth, then one of us is living a lie. Somewhere in the past, in moments they had ignored or forgotten, the answer waited, quiet, patient, ready to be found. The meeting at the cafe had ended in silence, but silence did not mean surrender. Each sibling left with the same thought echoing in their heads. "I need to know." Maya began her search the only way she knew, methodically. Back in her apartment, she cleared her schedule, claiming a sudden bout of illness. She sat at her desk long into the night, her laptop open to old bank records, property transfers, and archived public records. She called an old family friend under the pretense of catching up, slipping questions into the conversation like bait into a still pond. The friend's voice faltered when she mentioned the year after their father's death, confirming what Maya had already begun to suspect. There had been money moving quietly, in large amounts, to someone she had never heard of. Across the city, Jordan chose a different path. He drove to their childhood home, now abandoned, the curtains drawn, the garden wild with weeds. Standing on the porch felt strange, like visiting a place both familiar and foreign. He unlocked the door with the spare key he had kept hidden for years. Inside, dust coated every surface, the air thick with the scent of old wood and neglect. He went straight to the attic, knowing Elora had stored her most personal things there. In a weathered trunk beneath a moth-eaten quilt, he found a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon. The handwriting on the envelopes was unfamiliar, and the return addresses were from towns far away. The dates lined up with the early years of his own childhood, years when his mother had seemed distracted, distant. He sat on the floor and opened one. The words were tender, almost desperate. They spoke of promises, of gratitude, of a child who would never know the truth unless you decide it is time. Jordan's pulse quickened. Lena's search was more hesitant. She began by digging through the digital remains of their mother's life, email accounts, social media pages, old phone backups she had retrieved when they cleared out Elora's things. She found photos she had never seen before, pictures of Elora with strangers, smiling in ways Lena did not recognize. One photo stopped her cold, her mother, holding a newborn baby in a hospital room, but none of the siblings were that young when the photo was taken. On the back of the printed copy was a date that didn't match any of their birthdays. Within days, the three of them began to sense they were chasing the same shadow from different directions. It was Maya who broke the silence first, calling Jordan late at night. Her voice was low, urgent. "I think she was telling the truth," she said. "I found things." "I found letters," Jordan admitted after a pause. "I found a picture," Lena added when they brought her into the call. For a moment, no one spoke. They were each holding pieces of a puzzle they had avoided for years, pieces that now fit together with disturbing ease. Maya spoke again, her voice steadier. "We're not going to get the rest from each other. If we want answers, we need to go to the source, whatever's left of it." The next morning, they agreed to meet. Not at a cafe this time, but at the old house, the place where the lies had been born. None of them said it out loud, but they all knew the truth waited for them there. And the truth was rarely kind. The old house greeted them with the same stillness it had when Jordan first came alone, but now the air seemed heavier, thicker with expectation. Dust swirled in the weak light that filtered through the curtains, settling on the worn furniture and faded wallpaper, like the past refusing to let go. They did not speak as they moved through the rooms. Each of them knew what they were looking for, though none had said it aloud. Their footsteps echoed differently here, carrying the weight of three separate lives converging in a single, unavoidable moment. It was Lena who found it. She had been drawn to their mother's bedroom, a space they had all avoided since her death. The bed was neatly made, as though Elora had been expecting company even in her final days. On the dresser sat a small wooden jewelry box, the same one Lena remembered from childhood. It was where Elora had kept her most treasured pieces, delicate necklaces, a gold watch, a wedding ring that hadn't been worn in years. But when Lena opened it, there were no jewels inside. Only a folded envelope, yellowed at the edges, with their names written across the front in Elora's careful hand. Her breath caught. She called for Maya and Jordan, her voice unsteady. They gathered around the bed. Maya took the envelope, her fingers trembling despite her controlled demeanor. She unfolded the letter inside, and Elora's handwriting spilled across the page in the same voice they had all heard in the recording. Steady, deliberate, meant to be read when she could no longer speak. The letter told the story in pieces, each sentence landing with the weight of years. Elora wrote of a time when she had been alone, abandoned by the man who would later become their father. She had been pregnant, scared, and without resources. It was during those months that someone else, a man she never named, had stepped into her life. He had offered her stability, safety, and something she thought she had lost forever: hope. From that bond had come a child. One of them. Elora did not say who, but she described the day their father returned, full of promises and apologies. She described the bargain they had struck. They would raise all three children as his, and no one, not even the child in question, would ever know the truth. "You are all mine," the letter read, "every one of you. But one of you carries another man's blood." It was not betrayal, it was survival. It was love in the only form I could give at the time. Jordan's eyes narrowed as he read over Maya's shoulder. Lena stood back, her hands pressed to her mouth. The room seemed to shrink around them, the air charged with accusation even before words were spoken. Maya was the first to break the silence. She didn't say who. She didn't have to, Jordan muttered, his tone dark. Lena shook her head sharply. No, we don't know. We can't know. Not unless we... Her voice trailed off. They all knew what she meant. A test. Proof. Something to end the questions once and for all. But as they stood there, the thought of that proof was almost worse than the mystery. The truth was already a wedge between them. Confirmation could shatter what little remained. Jordan turned away, pacing toward the window. One of us doesn't belong here. One of us never did. The words hung in the air like a verdict. None of them noticed the way the late afternoon light seemed to dim, shadows stretching across the floor like long, reaching hands. In the quiet of that old room, the truth had finally risen from where it had been buried, and with it came the realization that some fractures could never be mended. The days after the letter felt unreal, as if the world had shifted and left them walking through a life that no longer fit. Maya, Jordan, and Lena moved like ghosts in their own routines, answering calls, attending meetings, posting online, but each action felt hollow, like going through the motions in a play where the ending had already been written. They met again reluctantly in the same old house. It was a gray afternoon, the sky pressing low, rain threatening but never falling. The walls seemed to listen as they stepped inside, their footsteps soft on the worn carpet. None of them knew why they had agreed to meet. Perhaps they all hoped for some final clarity, a thread to stitch the torn fabric of their family back together. The living room was just as they had left it. The letter sat on the coffee table, its folds deepened from being read and reread. The silence stretched so long that the ticking clock in the hallway felt deafening. Maya was the first to speak. Her voice was calm, but her eyes carried the exhaustion of someone who had been holding herself together for too long. "We can take the test," she said. "We can end the doubt." Jordan shook his head immediately. "And what then? We find out, and everything breaks for good? At least now there's still something." Lena's gaze moved between them, her arms folded tight across her chest. "Something? This isn't something. This is nothing. We've been nothing for years. We just didn't want to admit it." The words stung, but no one argued. They all knew she was right. Jordan poured himself a drink from the dusty cabinet in the corner, the sound of the liquid hitting glass oddly loud in the quiet. "She's gone," he said finally. "And we're standing here like idiots, trying to fix something that's already over." Maya's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm not trying to fix it. I just want to know the truth." She wanted us to find it. Or maybe she wanted us to destroy each other. Jordan countered, his voice sharp. Lena flinched at the bitterness in his tone. "She loved us. She always loved us, even when we didn't deserve it." For a moment, the three of them stood in a fragile triangle, each one afraid to move closer or further away. The weight of unspoken apologies hung in the air, heavy enough to crush them, but no one reached for the words. Eventually, Maya picked up the letter, folding it carefully and sliding it back into the envelope. "We'll never be the same," she said quietly. "But maybe we never were." Jordan looked away, his jaw tight. Lena turned toward the window, staring out at the overgrown garden where they had once played. When they finally left, they went in separate directions, no plans to meet again. Outside, the rain finally began to fall, soft at first, then steady, blurring the edges of the street and the sound of their retreating footsteps. Inside the house, the clock in the hallway kept ticking, indifferent. The letter remained where Maya had placed it, its truth folded neatly away, waiting for someone else to open it. The question Alora had left behind, "Is forgiveness possible for the living when the dead cannot hear it?" remained unanswered, a quiet echo in each of their hearts. And so they carried it with them, into the rest of their lives, into the silence that stretched far beyond the walls of the house where it all began.